Well, anti-racism and social justice activist Zulaikha Patel in 2016 became the symbol of the fight against Pretoria Girls High School's policy on black hair. At the age of just 13, she and her classmates held a demonstration that led to not only a change in school policy on hair, but also an inquiry into allegations of racism at the school. Zulaikha says, and I quote, "Asking me to change my hair is like asking me to erase my blackness," unquote. And she has now written a book. It's called My Coily Crowny Hair, and you would have seen, and heard a lot about that. And also, she has since collected accolades in recognition of her bravery, including Brand SA's Play Your Part ambassadorship, an initiative to inspire and celebrate active citizenry. And of course, it is Women's Month, and we continue to celebrate women. Social justice activist and author Zulaikha Patel joins us now for a conversation. Zulaikha, good morning and welcome. Good to have you with us here on Morning Live.
Good morning to you too. Thank you for having me.
So you were at the entry point of your teen years when you were thrust into this limelight of activism in South Africa. And you've since gone on to say that the issue of your hair has always, been one that had fooled you, or should I say followed you your entire life. Now, what influences were you exposed to in your early childhood that led to you becoming more inclined towards activism?
Thank you. So in terms of my early childhood, the influences that I had around me, which inclined me into my activism, I believe were rather my real life circumstances, whereby some of the experiences that I had influenced my path going into my activism. Because as a child, I grew up very socially aware. Very socially aware of the conditions that we live in as a country, in a post-apartheid democratic South Africa. I grew up of the social conditions such as racism and what racism looks like in a post-apartheid South Africa, and that racism is institutional and systematic now, rather than it being constitutional. And I grew up very socially aware of those particular things, because growing up in an interfaith and interracial background made me sort of almost like kind of exposed to the harsh reality of the fact that racism wasn't buried in 1994, because I feel like at the time of my early childhood, South Africa was still in a point where we weren't necessarily ready to still tackle issues of racism and tackle them head on. And so I experienced quite a lot of upfront, direct racist incidents as a child, which made me very socially aware of the kind of society I live in and what systems are part of the society that I live in. And so as a child, I think from the age of when I was in grade 2, I was able to identify and know that I'm being mistreated because of racism, and not coincidentally being mistreated, or I'm being bullied because of racism and I'm not coincidentally being bullied. So I was very socially aware, and I also did have a bit of a political influence growing up, because I grew up in a household whereby politics was not a conversation that we'd shy away from. And this was primarily because of my father's influence. He was always someone that opened up that kind of conversation. And so I was quite socially aware, and my being socially aware of the kind of conditions our country is under essentially also influenced me to have a voice on those kind of conditions, as I was experiencing some of them.
So, Zulaikha, and as you say that, one has to be reminded that at the time you were only 13 years old when you became well known for what could today be viewed as your generation's defiance campaign, perhaps, as it were, because you stood up against a policy that overlooked that there are actually differences, different type of hair, and that neat doesn't only mean straight hair. And then you also at the time risked you risked arrest, and you led a silent protest in demonstration of you and other teenagers' disagreement with the school policy. What went through your mind at that tender age? You know, just being confronted with all of these possibilities with very serious implications at the time.
I think at the time, in terms of what went through my mind, in terms of being confronted by all these serious issues that all could have actually happened, I think that there was one thing at the center of my mind, primarily being that has to happen. There has to be some form of change, because what I also knew at the time was that the issues that were confronting me were also not right and were injustices in their own right. Even the mere fact that I'd been threatened with arrest was an injustice on its own. And so I knew at the time that as much as all these serious implications were directly facing me, they were also ultimately wrong on their own. So I knew that this was something that I possibly couldn't back out of at this stage. And also I knew that essentially all the issues that confronted me at the time were all wrong. So that was another factor that further pushed me into pursuing what I pursued at the time, because I knew that what I was confronted with was wrong on its own. So in my mind, what essentially went through my mind was I took these issues that were confronting me as sort of like almost a motivational push to continue with my activism at the time, because I knew that those all those issues were wrong on their own. So that was what was going through my mind, and of course knowing that there had to be some form of an institutional change.
Now, Zulaikha, just as we're running out of time, what is your message to your contemporaries today and to younger South African children growing up? Because it is a very difficult space. It's a tough terrain growing up in contemporary South Africa. What message do you have for them?
I think having gone through certain injustices when I was as a child growing up till now, I think that it's fair to say that we are not where we should be as a country. And the message that I would leave them with is perhaps almost to paraphrase the words of Frantz Fanon, that every generation has a struggle for liberation of its own, and perhaps ours is a continuation of what was left where the generation that came before us, where they left off. Perhaps our struggle for liberation as a generation is a continuation from that. And what our continuation would look like is more of an economic liberation, as well as a psychological liberation, and as well as institutional change in the country. So I think that perhaps our struggle for change is a continuation from where the generation that came before us left off. So I think I would leave them with the message that we should hold ourselves accountable to the fact that the generation that then comes after us should not have to confront the same issues that we confronted.
Well, Zulaikha, we thank you for your time, for your activism, and just for being you, and appreciative of the fact that we got to celebrate you this Women's Month. So please take care, please be well, and continue to fight the good fight. That was a social justice activist and author Zulaikha Patel, as we celebrate women who have made an impact in South Africa.